Hi there, and welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. And here we are, 24 hours on from the initial attack on Venezuela by the United States of America. Much of what I'm going to say in this podcast today is kind of based in sort of semi-informed speculation. Okay, so I urge you to take anything I say with a hint of not a skepticism, because I'm trying my best to present something that's vaguely credible here, but everything I say could be completely wrong, and it's entirely possible entirely likely in fast-moving events that everything I say now may well be out of date within 24 hours. So this is a kind of a field of speculation. But it's kind of informed by previous examples and some geopolitical and military realities. So the first thing to say is that one of Trump's it's not necessarily one of his skills, because he's always given a free pass by the press. But one of the things he understands is that if you make a statement, particularly an outrageous statement, and it is almost certainly an untrue statement, the media, due to kind of institutional failings, degrees of incompetence, and general toadyism, will repeat it. So Trump can say things that are demonstrably untrue or clearly not possible, and the media will amplify it and repeat it. Today, he has said, or perhaps it might have been yesterday, but he said, we are going to run Venezuela. And he creates a kind of a perception that the US has invaded Venezuela, has successfully overthrown the Venezuelan government, and is now occupying Venezuela. And none of those things are true. None of those things have happened. The US has carried out an abduction. They have broken international law by invading a sovereign country for long enough, using special forces to capture a head of state and abduct them. Now, in order to run Venezuela, and Trump has been remarkably candid about his the motivations in kind of seizing Venezuelan oil. His claim is that Venezuela has somehow done terrible and costly things to America, and therefore some kind of compensation in kind is due. So, in order for this to happen, the United States of America would need to be able to militarily occupy Venezuela. Now, if you think about the previous occupations, I mean, if you look at South Vietnam, at the height of mobilization in 1968, you're looking at 500,000 servicemen in South Vietnam. And in fact, it even goes up from there by the early 70s. And this is to fight an insurgency and to pursue a war against the North. I haven't done the maths, but I believe Venezuela to be significantly larger. Geographers, please write in. It's a huge and wild terrain. Again, I'm no geographer here, but the ability for the United States of America to fully occupy Venezuela, I'm sure we're talking in the high hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of servicemen and women. Now, do they have those kinds of numbers? Probably not. It's a very large army, but you have to remember that the United States of America has many, many strategic positions to cover. When you have, if you take the British Empire during the Boer War, How did the British Empire struggle against the Boers? Well, there was these kinds of arguments back in at the time that your standard British soldier was kind of short and rather unhealthy. But another problem is that a global empire that stretched far and wide and often quite thinly will often find it very difficult to concentrate all of its forces on one particular conflict, as if the conflict itself takes a long time to conclude. And the Boers understood that you could grind the British down by playing for time and by fighting a guerrilla war. Ho Chi Minh understood this, and a number of guerrilla armies throughout the 20th century have understood this, that you can bleed your enemy very, very slowly. Is there the political will in America to occupy Venezuela for a long period of time? Is there the political will in America to do that and to endure ongoing, a significant number of ongoing casualties from occupying troops? Almost certainly not. There is no kind of meaningful narrative there as to why America could or should do this, other than it being in the interest of American oil companies. It's interesting to see yesterday Trump or his various functionaries in the White House began to talk about how the terrible Venezuelan administration had not really been maintaining the oil infrastructure, and it was all rusty and run down. And typical kind of Trump bombast, he says, what our oil companies, they're going to sweep away this terrible socialism, and private enterprise. They're going to invest billions in a proper oil infrastructure of pipelines and refineries and all this kind of stuff. I mean, obviously, this is just kind of normal Trump off the cuff, make it up as you go along. There was very little response from the main American oil companies, who I don't think have had either any prior notice that they might have to be on the hook for some of this investment. No doubt they were all well aware of what Trump had in mind. Then again, it's entirely possible that what will emerge here will be kind of caprice, that Trump's capriciousness, his changeability, his ability to act on a whim will kind of be involved here, and that he'll have decided at a certain point that Maduro has disrespected him and something has to be done. That would partially explain the nature of the operation to target Maduro himself, to extradite him to America on some kind of trumped up charges. The flow of cocaine and fentanyl from Venezuela is minimal by all accounts, and the mechanisms, the sort of the chemical infrastructure for making fentanyl at scale in Venezuela simply isn't there. So this is a kind of WMD type kind of nonsense. The thing that we see here in terms of kind of causes for action, Trump is one of these inept empire handlers that comes and says the quiet part out loud, as I sort of discussed the other day. One of the reasons why the likes of Cheney and Rumsfeld and the original neocons and John Bolton and people like that never really liked Trump is they never really thought he was trustworthy enough to stick to the right kinds of talking points. that George W. Bush did. George W. Bush served the interests of American conglomerates, things like Cargill and the oil companies in the seizure of Iraq, but was able to kind of dress it up in the language of liberal internationalism, getting kind of useful idiots like Tony Blair on board, and being a palatable figure enough to eventually, when it came to questions of aid in Africa, be palling around with the likes of Bono. And George W. Bush has done a rather sort of bang up job of rehabilitating his image, courtesy of Barack Obama. They're seen together, joking and palling around and all that kind of thing. Trump's not like that at all. Trump is this kind of angry, bitter, resentful, over-personalizer of crises and conflicts, a man driven by kind of resentment and suspicion and pride and avarice and greed. He's sort of kind of cartoonishly, this kind of rather kind of cartoonish character that any vaguely sensible socialite or figure of empire has concluded a long time ago that someone like that is too peculiar, too irrational, too bad for business to let anywhere near the operating of power. Trump had various political ambitions over the years and was kind of marginalized and thwarted and kind of ignored and overlooked. And 2016 is what like as it was here with Brexit, one of these kind of great unintended disasters that happens. But we are where we are. But Trump says the quiet part out loud. He says, yes, we're here to steal Venezuela's oil, and in a way it's a useful education for the rest of us, to be able to look explicitly at what's being proposed here. But without the without the military means to fully and permanently occupy Venezuela, to reduce Venezuela to the level of a kind of a 19th century colony, without the political will in America to do that, there seems to be the conclusion it's only possible to come to is that much of this is about spectacle. Trump has every reason to want to create spectacle. It's kind of all he really knows how to do. He is economically in a lot of trouble. He hasn't dealt with the cost of living crisis. There are more Epstein revelations to come out. And then there's all the stuff that we probably don't know that is coming down the line that he does know is coming down the line. So there's every reason for him to crave spectacle, and perhaps even to create as much noise as he can do with a kind of a showy news headline grabbing operation, which ultimately cannot provide the kind of imperial outcomes that he claims are possible. It was interesting that the Mercado, the Nobel Prize winner, who almost on the day she received the prize began to advocate for the bombing of her own country to liberate it from the Bolivarian revolution, and to reimpose kind of the extremes of kind of neoliberal structural adjustment and privatization. Not the stuff you normally associate with the Nobel Peace Prize. Trump has already kind of thrown her under the bus. He said, she's hugely unpopular. Well, yes, she is. She's not really speaking the kind of language that the poor of the favelas are particularly tuned into. She's getting the Venezuelan poor to read a bit more Ayn Rand until they understand, what wonders might happen if we let capital off the leash. I think that's a bit of a weak prospect. So Maduro has been kidnapped. Mercado is unlikely to now be favoured in her attempt to become the sort of like the Milei or Bolsonaro of Venezuela. So the question begs itself: well, what then? Who is waiting in the wings to seize power? And the answer, I think, is nobody. So in a few days, I think what will emerge is that the Venezuelan government, as it is, will reassert itself. A replacement for Maduro will step into power. You will have a country that is probably quite uniformly united in its anger and resentment against American bombing. You have a country where the preparatory stages for all of this were happening throughout last year, with militias, workers' militias being organised, and assault rifles being handed out to citizens from the backs of trucks. So you have a conventional army who, I mean, traditionally the way of doing this thing was for somebody like Henry Kissinger to have a word with someone like Pinochet and give them the nod, or somebody at the embassy in Chile or Bolivia or Ecuador or Uruguay to give the army the nod. But then the army kind of do it for you. But I think in this instance, the army is far too well kind of sort of enmeshed within the regime. This is something I will be looking into to talk a bit more authoritatively about. But the fact that there was no coup against Chavez and there's been no coup against Maduro indicates that there's probably unlikely to be one now. So you have an army that hasn't been co-opted by America. You have a regime that hasn't been overthrown. You have the massive problems that would come from an invasion, and you're invading a country where you haven't got a land border with them. It's not like crossing from Saudi into Iraq. In order to seize Venezuela, you would imagine airborne or amphibian operations would have to happen. These are incredibly difficult. Mass casualties often ensue, and you've not necessarily got. I mean, it would be interesting to find out what was happening with the air defences around Caracas the other night, but you haven't had months and months of bombing to degrade the Venezuelan military preparedness or military infrastructure. Perhaps that will come. Perhaps what we will see next is a more Putin type attack on Venezuela, and perhaps there will be 6 months of round the clock bombing before an invasion happens. Will that, what will that achieve? This is the question. Trump's got a kind of the clock is ticking, of course, because Trump's wings are going to be decidedly clipped when the midterms happen, and so Trump is either in a stage where he thinks I better achieve what I can and steal what I can, and I've got until the autumn to do it, or I had better create as much chaos as I can to hand over when the Democrats take the Senate and the House. It's always entirely possible that he's thinking none of these things. things, and that Trump is reacting in ways which are known only to him, which is again, it's entirely possible. But I think a problem that we have is the uncritical media amplification of everything he says. I cannot think of a single commentator that has said, when he said we're going to run Venezuela, which I suspect, having said that, if there were any Venezuelans wavering, they're probably a fair old few that have decided that that's a bad thing. There are some who, and mainly that are part of the kind of the emigre community, that are saying, hurrah, hurrah, it's Liberation Day. This is wonderful. We are going to be liberated from the kind of the horrors of Venezuelan socialism, etc., etc. Looking at the stats, that doesn't look like it's a vast majority of Venezuelan people. It looks like it's an extreme minority. But there doesn't seem to be a single correspondent, a single reporter who, when he says we're going to be running Venezuela, who's asked that crucial word, how? How are you going to do that? How are you going to be in control of Venezuela in any meaningful way, short of waging one of the biggest wars in American history, which would be almost guaranteed to fail? The one thing I think that's worth kind of finishing on is looking at the nature of kind of the asymmetric nature of warfare at the moment. It's hardly kind of difficult to observe that Russian tanks are not in Kiev, and that a much smaller and a much less populous country in the guise of Ukraine has fought an epically successful, even though the balance is shifting at the moment, an epically successful campaign, often using things like drones. The battleship, the Moskva, sunk by waterborne drones. Russian tanks have been annihilated by drones that cost maybe a couple of $100. So the people that understand military operations far better than I ever will, surely are aware of this. And you would imagine, and I'm just going to assume that sort of this is a kind of a sort of the normal functioning of things. I mean, I'm sure Trump is perfectly capable of ignoring people that advise him on these kinds of matters. That there are people in the White House, people from the Pentagon, who are pointing out these very realities, that the kinds of things that he is proposing would take hundreds of thousands, if not a deployment of 1 million or more soldiers, and you would somehow, even during all of that, you would somehow need to change hearts and minds in Venezuela to the extent that ordinary people stop fighting the occupation. They suddenly realize this is a good thing, this is in everybody's interests. And that I rarely kind of use the word impossible when talking about modern history, but I would say that is, if not impossible, without any precedent ever. That suddenly people go, yes, this army of occupation that's on our soil, we rather like it now. It's behaved so well, and our material conditions have improved so greatly that we will accept it and kind of cooperate with the regime. I think I can think of no example of that in the second half, at least, of the 20th century. So, again, we're in a fluid situation. We're in a situation where nobody knows precisely, not even Trump, I think, what is going to happen. But I think there is cause to just be a little bit skeptical about some of these pronouncements when you think of the actual realities of it. And the scale of the operation. The final thing to say is that there's countless books written about post 2003 Iraq. There was a great one, Imperial Life in the Emerald City, and the evidence was that there had been no planning for what happened after an American invasion. I think there was something like about 2.5 years planning for what to do with Germany once it was occupied by the Allies. And this planning had begun when there was no indication that an Allied victory was in sight. This is sort of kind of early 1942. But it went on, and there was a very detailed picture of what to do, all the way down to how to open schools again, how to turn on power plants, where the kind of the pumping station in Cologne was, that kind of thing. There was none of that. Partly to do with this kind of rather ridiculous kind of worldview of people like Donald Rumsfeld of hey, freedom's messy. And the whole point is this very kind of libertarian notion, which is mixed with all the kind of the authoritarianisms of neoconservatism, that what we would do is just essentially blow the state apart in Iraq, and then just let people decide what happens. And what they do decide is in a country riven with ethnic and religious and sectarian tensions, when the Sunni are removed from power and placed under the control of the Shia by the American authorities, didn't understand any of these dynamics, a horrific civil war began. So in Venezuela, I would imagine, again, I could be wrong, please write in if I am, I would imagine even less thought has gone into what to do with Venezuela. What to do if you somehow topple the government. What to do if you somehow landed hundreds of thousands of American soldiers and occupied the place. I would imagine there's been almost zero thought, which kind of places it at this moment of almost unimaginable hubris. Because you probably can win a set piece battle against the Venezuelan army and defeat it. I imagine that's not the hard bit. I imagine the hard bit is the next 5 years after that. That becomes the impossible bit. So there you go. I mean, and I think what happens in these situations, the way that kind of great powers are diminished, is the world sees when the emperor has no clothes. The world sees in those instances the realities and the limitations of hard power. And Trump has shredded America's soft power, diplomatic power, to an extent that, and purposefully, in this kind of sort of bizarre machismo that he shares with Pete Hegseth, where kind of only the ability to sort of fight and dominate your enemies has any value at all. Well, I suspect he'll learn some salutary lessons on that one, or maybe he won't. Maybe he doesn't learn things. But I think that there is going to be, what will be revealed is that any attempt to seize Venezuela will come from a place of almost zero planning. And it would be interesting to see, with the various kind of purges at the State Department and the Department of Defense and things like that, where the institutional memory has gone. Have they got rid of all the people that normally their job is to sort of peer over their desks and say, no, you can't do that. That's a terrible idea. And here are the 5 reasons why. And here are the reasons, the times when it all went wrong in the past. Those kinds of people in any administration are really, really valuable. And you only really realize that when they're gone. And I suspect many of them are gone. So, again, look upon all of this that I'm saying as kind of theory and speculation. And if it's all proven wrong, well, then it is, and that's how it goes. I think at least some of it will be right, but you decide. You decide, and no doubt there are many far more knowledgeable people than me, and it's important to listen to what they say and to draw your own picture. Right. Quick. After the end of all of that, quick announcement. So, after years of neglecting it, I've suddenly realised that we really should do something with Patreon. Now, if you don't want to hear adverts, and they are the kind of the lifeblood of this podcast, they pay for my gas bill and things like that. Then you can go to Patreon, and for the princely sum of £5 a month, or whatever that works out in your local currency, you can listen to everything I put out ad free. Of course, there are about getting on for nearly 900 podcasts now, so it'll be a while before I kind of figure out some clever technological means to shift those all over onto Patreon as well. And a fair few have been lost in the mists of time. So it will be kind of starting from scratch, but going forward, everything I put out, including this episode, is going to be on Patreon, and it will be free from adverts. So you can just listen to me droning on from start to finish. Anyway, let's finish there, and I'll be talking more about this particularly disastrous turn of events in the coming week, along with our regular contributions. Take care, everyone. All the best. Bye bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of Explaining History. This podcast is an independent production, and it's listener support that keeps these conversations going week after week. If you find value in the show and want to help cover the costs of research and production, please consider making a contribution. You can join our community on Patreon or make a one-off donation. Just follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Every bit of support is truly appreciated. Thanks again for listening.